The neon frontier is expanding, pushing the boundaries of what we believe to be real and what we dare to imagine. Join our expedition into the furthest reaches of the digital wilderness to find the stories of tomorrow. Hit subscribe now and become a pioneer of the next big reveal.
My sister stood at the podium in that hotel ballroom and tapped the microphone twice, the way she always does when she wants everyone's attention. She looked out at 200 guests in evening wear, smiled the smile she's been practicing her whole life, and said, "I just want to acknowledge my family, my parents, who gave me everything." She paused. "And my little sister, who, well, she tries." The table laughed. My brother-in-law laughed. My father lifted his glass slightly, like a man granting permission for the joke to land. My mother looked at the centerpiece. I didn't move. I had learned a long time ago not to move when the laughter was about me. Then the woman seated to my left, the one I'd been introduced to 40 minutes earlier, the one whose name I had not yet matched to the face on the covers of 3 different business magazines, leaned toward me and said quietly, "They don't know, do they?" It wasn't a question, and that was the moment I understood that the evening was going to go very differently than my sister had planned. I need to tell you how we got there, because the ballroom wasn't the beginning. The beginning was a Tuesday afternoon in early April, the year I turned 9, when my father drove my sister and me to his office for Take Your Kids to Work Day. My sister was 13. She sat in the front seat and my father explained things to her the whole drive, the exits on the highway, the parking structure, which floor had the best view. I sat in the back and watched the city pass through the window. At the office, he walked her through every department. He introduced her to his colleagues as his daughter, the one who was already thinking about business school. His colleagues would smile and say, "She looks just like you." My father would nod like that was the right answer. I followed them. Nobody introduced me. On the drive home, my father asked my sister what she thought she'd want to study. She said finance because she'd heard him say it mattered. He said, "That's my girl." I watched the back of his headrest and counted exits. I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because that afternoon is the one I return to when people ask when I first understood, not when I first felt it. I felt it long before that. But when I understood that the feeling was accurate, that I was not imagining the difference in how I was seen, that it was real and consistent and not going to change because I earned better grades or tried harder or stopped taking up space. My sister was not cruel in the way that requires planning. She was cruel the way people are when cruelty has never cost them anything. She didn't have to think about whether what she said would hurt me. It simply didn't occur to her that it might matter. She was good at school the way pretty girls with confident fathers are good at school. She performed well in the subjects that rewarded performance, charmed the teachers who rewarded charm, and coasted through the rest. Our parents treated her transcripts like sacred texts. When I got better scores, my mother would say, "That's sweet, honey," and then ask my sister what she wanted for dinner. I stopped showing them my grades around the time I stopped expecting the reaction to be different. My father ran a mid-sized commercial real estate firm. He built it from almost nothing, which he mentioned often. He wanted my sister to carry it forward, which he also mentioned often. He started including her in his business conversations when she was 15. He took her to client dinners. He explained deal structures and market cycles over Sunday breakfast, while I sat at the same table 4 feet away, reading whatever book I'd found, technically present and functionally invisible. The business school he sent her to was his alma mater. He paid for it without question and called it an investment. I applied to the same school. He told me it was expensive and asked if I'd considered community college first. I went somewhere else on scholarship. I didn't tell him about the scholarship for 3 years. I studied architecture. Not because I'd always dreamed about buildings, I hadn't particularly, but because I was good at seeing how things fit together, how structure and space interact, how the bones of something determine what it becomes. I found out later that this is more or less what architects do for a living. At the time, I just followed what made sense to me and trusted that sense more than I trusted anyone's opinion of it. My family thought architecture was impractical. My father said it once directly, and my mother said it through the particular silence she used when she agreed with my father but didn't want to say so out loud. My sister said, "Oh, that's creative. The way you say something is creative when you mean it isn't serious." I graduated and went to work for a firm in Seattle. I was good at it. Not immediately. I made mistakes in the first 2 years that I still think about, but I was good at listening to what a space needed to do and figuring out how to make it do that. I was good at the technical problems, and I was better than good at the client relationships, which surprised me because I'd always been quiet and I thought quiet meant bad at people. It turns out quiet means something different when you're listening. I worked on residential projects mostly, then started getting pulled on to commercial work, then mixed-use development, which is where things got interesting. Mixed use requires you to think about a building not just as a structure but as a community. What draws people in? What makes them stay? What makes a block feel alive instead of dead? I turned out to have opinions about this that other people found useful. My family knew almost nothing about any of this. When they asked about my job, I said, "It's going well," and redirected to whatever they wanted to talk about, which was usually my sister's promotion or my brother-in-law's new car or whether my parents were going to repaint the kitchen. I had learned that the details of my work were not interesting to them, and I had stopped offering them. My sister had joined my father's firm after her MBA. She was good at the parts of the business that required relationship management and bad at the parts that required rigor. My father didn't notice the second part because he was too pleased about the first part and because the bad parts were easy to quietly fix. She made vice president in 4 years. She told me this over the phone and I said, "That's great." And I meant it, because her advancement cost me nothing and her happiness was not my enemy. She got married the year I turned 28. Her husband was a man I'll call reasonable, not warm, exactly, but not mean either, just a person who occupied space and generated no particular effect. My father gave a toast at the rehearsal dinner that included the phrase, "the family I always dreamed of," and managed, in 9 minutes, to never once mention me. I flew in and flew out. 2 days. My mother hugged me at the airport and said, "It means so much that you came." Like I was a distant cousin who had made a long trip. Not a daughter who lived 2 time zones away and had taken vacation days for this. The project that changed everything arrived when I was 31, not the project itself. I mean the commission, the trust, the question someone asked me when I hadn't been expecting to be asked anything. A development group in Chicago had acquired a full city block in a neighborhood that had been declining for 20 years and was now showing the first signs of coming back. They wanted something that would anchor the recovery without accelerating displacement, something that would serve the existing community while attracting the investment needed to make it sustainable. It was exactly the kind of problem I've been thinking about for 6 years in the back of my mind and in the margins of other projects. I wasn't supposed to be in the room when they were making the decision. I was there as support for a senior partner who was presenting. The senior partner presented. The development group asked questions, and then one of them, a woman named Adrienne who ran the community investment side of the firm and had been mostly quiet until that point, asked a question that nobody in the room had an answer to. It was about how to structure community benefit agreements in a way that created genuine accountability without making the project unbuildable. I knew the answer because I had been thinking about exactly that problem for 8 months on a pro bono project in Seattle. I said so. Quietly from the back of the room, Adrienne looked at me for a long moment and said, "Tell me more." What followed was 18 months of the hardest and most absorbing work I had ever done. The project required solutions that didn't have templates, partnerships that required trust to build from scratch, design choices that answered to competing values simultaneously. I worked with city planners and community organizations and structural engineers and local business owners. I made decisions under pressure and then defended them when the pressure got worse. The project came in over timeline and under budget. When it opened, the neighborhood newspaper ran a front-page story about it. The story mentioned my name. I sent my parents a link. My mother replied, "Very nice, honey, proud of you." My father didn't reply. My sister sent a thumbs-up emoji. Adrienne introduced me to her partners after the project wrapped. One of those partners had a project in Austin that needed the same kind of thinking. That project led to another. My practice shifted from working inside a firm to running my own. The transition happened over 2 years, gradually enough that I barely noticed it was happening until it had happened. I was 33 when my firm was recognized by a national architecture publication as one of the 10 practices to watch. I was 34 when we were shortlisted for a project that would have been significant on any terms, but was significant to me specifically because it was in the city where I grew up, 15 minutes from my parents' house. I did not tell my parents we were shortlisted. I had learned slowly and at some cost that telling them things I cared about only gave them opportunities to be indifferent in ways that hurt more than if I'd kept the thing to myself. The gala was my sister's idea, or at least her execution of my father's idea. He was turning 65, retiring from the firm, and she wanted to celebrate in a way that also functioned as a professional send-off. She booked a hotel ballroom, hired a caterer, invited 200 people, clients, colleagues, family friends, the whole architecture of my father's career in one room. My sister organized everything, and the invitation came to me like a summons, not a request. I was expected to attend. I would attend. I flew in the Friday before. My mother picked me up from the airport, and on the drive home she told me about the seating arrangements and the menu and what color the centerpieces were. She asked if I was seeing anyone. I said I wasn't. She said, "You'll meet someone," which was her way of ending that topic. The next morning I went to the venue to pick up my place card and ran into a woman I didn't expect to see there. Her name was Charlotte Briggs. I knew her the way architects in my field know certain figures, by reputation first, then by work, then by the particular gravity that some people have when they've built something that keeps mattering. She had founded and led one of the most respected architecture and urban design practices in the country, the kind of firm that other firms studied. She was also, I would learn in the next 3 minutes, a longtime client of my father's who had used his firm for her company's office acquisitions going back 15 years. She recognized me before I recognized her. She said my name, my last name, the way people say it when they know the work, and asked if I was the one who had done the Chicago block project in the Austin Transit development. I said yes. She said she'd been following my work for 2 years. She said the community benefit structure we'd built in Chicago was being studied by 3 other city governments trying to do the same thing. She said she had a project that she'd been waiting to find the right architect for, and she was wondering if I'd be willing to have a conversation. I said yes to that too. We talked for 40 minutes. I was laid to help with setup. I didn't care. At dinner, I was seated at a table near the back with cousins and old family friends. My sister was at the front next to my father. This was not unexpected. This was, in fact, exactly the seating arrangement that had always existed in my family, given physical form and assigned a table number. Charlotte Briggs was seated at the table to my left as a guest of my father's, and we had already met and we had already talked, and she already knew things about my work that my own family didn't know. My sister gave a speech. She talked about my father's legacy and the firm he built and the clients he'd served. She talked about the family that supported him. She mentioned my mother by name. She gestured at my father's colleagues by section. She said at the end, "And my little sister who, well, she tries." The table laughed. I watched Charlotte Briggs's face. She didn't laugh. She looked at me with an expression that asked a question I didn't know how to answer yet. Then she leaned over and said, "They don't know, do they?" I said, "Know what?" She said, "What you've built, who you are in this field, any of it." I looked at the centerpiece, pale pink roses which my mother had chosen, and thought about how to answer honestly. "No," I said. "They don't ask." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's about to become difficult to maintain." The program continued. My father gave a short speech thanking the people in the room, naming names, working through the professional acknowledgments with the thoroughness of a man who understood that acknowledgment was a form of currency. He thanked my sister extensively. He mentioned me once, at the end, briefly, as my other daughter, the way you mention an item on a list to demonstrate the list is complete. Then the evening's host, a man from my father's industry association who had been running the program, came to the microphone to close. He thanked my father again, and then he said there was one more item he wanted to acknowledge. He said he was aware that many of the people in the room knew my father's work and his firm's work, but that fewer of them might be aware that another member of the family had been building something significant in the same field. I had not been told this was happening. I don't know to this day if Charlotte Briggs made a phone call, or if it had already been planned, or if it was simply something that emerged from the collision of 2 truths in the same room. The host said he wanted to recognize that my firm had just been named the lead architect on the new Performing Arts Center for the city. The project I had been shortlisted for. The one 15 minutes from my parents' house. The one I hadn't told them about. He said the announcement had come through that morning. He said the project represented a $180 million investment in the city's cultural future, and that my practice had been chosen because of our record of community-centered design. He said my name. Not other daughter. My name. I don't remember standing up. I remember being standing and the room being louder than it had been, and my father's face on the other side of the room doing something I had never seen it do before, which was nothing. Absolutely nothing, like a signal with no response. My sister's face was easier to read. She looked the way people look when the story they've been telling themselves turns out to have a chapter they didn't know about. My mother had her hand over her mouth. Charlotte Briggs, to my left, applauded with the specific intentionality of someone making a statement. I don't remember what I said. I know I said something because there are people who came up to me afterward and quoted it back to me. I know I thanked the city and the selection committee and my team because that was true and those people deserve to be thanked. I know I said something about the neighborhood where the center was going to be built because I had been thinking about that neighborhood for 2 years, and everything I felt about this project was tied up in what that block of land had been and what it was going to become. What I didn't say, standing at that microphone, was anything about my family. I didn't address them. I didn't look at them. That wasn't because I was trying to make a point. It was because the work was the point. The work had always been the point, and I wasn't going to use the moment when it was finally seen to say anything that made it about something other than what it was. Afterward, the room rearranged itself the way rooms do when information has changed who matters in them. People I hadn't spoken to all evening came to find me. Colleagues of my father's who had looked through me at the cocktail hour were now listening carefully to everything I said and handing me business cards. Charlotte Briggs stayed close and introduced me to 3 people I had been trying to meet for 2 years. My father didn't cross the room. My sister came to me around 9 o'clock, when the dinner had broken down into smaller conversations, and the room had grown a little loose. She came with a glass of wine and the expression of a person who has prepared a speech and is now uncertain whether to give it. She said, "I didn't know." I said, "I know you didn't." She said, "Why didn't you tell us?" I had thought about this question, in various forms, for years. Not because I anticipated this specific moment, but because it is the question that exists beneath every family gathering where you hold something back and smile through the indifference and drive home afterward with the things still intact, still yours, still uncomplicated by their opinions. I said, because you never asked, not once, not about any of it. My first big project, my first client, the firm I started, the work that got recognized, you never asked. Dad asked me once if I was making enough to pay my rent. That's the only question I remember about my career in 6 years. She didn't say anything for a moment. I said, "I'm not telling you this to make you feel bad. I'm telling you because you asked, and the true answer isn't I don't know or it just never came up. It came up every time I called home and talked for 20 minutes and left without having been asked a single question about my work. It came up at every Christmas dinner where Dad asked about your deals for 40 minutes and asked me if I was keeping busy. I stopped offering because there was nowhere to put it." She looked at her wine glass. "I called you a try-hard in front of 200 people. You said I try," which in context meant the same thing. She didn't argue with this. "I'm sorry," she said. And I believed her. Whether I believed the understanding behind it, whether she was sorry for the specific moment or for the pattern the moment had come from, I wasn't sure. I'm still not sure. These things take time to know. My father found me near the end of the evening when most of the guests had gone and the catering staff was beginning to move things off tables. He came over with the particular gait of a man who has rehearsed an approach and then forgotten what he planned to say when he got there. He said, "That's a big project." I said, "Yes." He said, "I didn't know your firm was in contention for that." I said, "We've been shortlisted for 6 months." He was quiet. Behind him, my mother was watching from a careful distance, doing what she had always done, which was staying close enough to witness without being close enough to be implicated. He said, "I underestimated you." I waited to feel something. I had thought about this moment in various configurations, not this particular scene, but the abstract version of it, the moment when the assessment I'd grown up under would be revised. I had thought I would feel relief, or vindication, or the specific satisfaction of being proven right. What I actually felt was something closer to tired. I said, "I know you did." He said, "I'd like to understand more about what you're doing." I said, "I'm open to that. But I want you to understand that this conversation is 6 years late and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. You can call me. I'll answer, but I'm not going to walk you through my career like I'm making up for lost time on your behalf." He looked at me for a long moment. He's a man who is used to controlling his expressions, and his expression was controlled, but there was something underneath it, not remorse exactly, but the precursor to remorse, the moment before a person decides whether to let themselves feel accountable. He said, "Fair enough." My mother came over then. She took my hand in both of hers, which was more contact than we usually had, and she said, "I'm so proud of you." I looked at her. She meant it. I could see that she meant it, and I knew it was true, and it cost me more to receive it than she knew. I said, "Thank you. I needed to hear that earlier, years earlier, when I was just starting out and didn't know if I was doing the right thing." It would have meant a lot then. Now it means something different. She said I should have said it more. I said, "Yes, you should have." She hugged me. I let her. There are things you hold on to even when they're late, and a mother's arms are one of them. And I'm not so defended that I can't receive something just because it arrives after it should have. I flew home 2 days later. The project in Chicago called the morning I landed. There was a design question that needed my input. I sat in my apartment with my laptop and a cup of coffee and answered it, the way I had been answering questions like it for years, in the early mornings before the city was fully awake, with no one watching and no one counting, and the work itself the only witness. That's the part nobody was in the room for. Not the gala, not the announcement, not my father's expression when he heard my name read out loud in a room he thought he owned. The part nobody saw was the 6 years of Tuesday mornings when I got up and did the work anyway, when I made the calls and took the meetings and revised the plans and sent the emails and built something that nobody in my family knew existed. The gala was one evening. The work is every morning. 3 months after the event, the firm landed 2 more commissions. Charlotte Briggs referred one of them. The other came through a contact I'd made at the dinner. A man who had known my father for years and had decided after that night that he wanted to know me. My sister and I have talked 4 times since then. Real conversations, not the performances we used to give each other. She asked me once what the Chicago project actually was, and I told her, and she listened the whole time, and at the end she said, "I had no idea." I said, "I know." We sat with that for a moment, the particular silence of 2 people who grew up in the same house and are only now meeting. My father called last month. He asked about the Performing Arts Center, about the timeline and the design approach and the community engagement process. He asked real questions, the kind you only ask if you've actually thought about the work beforehand. I answered them. When we hung up, I sat in my car in the parking garage for a little while, not thinking about anything specific, just letting the conversation settle. I don't know what my family is becoming. I know what I built while they weren't watching. I know that the work exists independent of whether they acknowledge it, and that its value was never waiting for their recognition to be confirmed. But I also know that my father asked real questions, and that my sister listened, and that my mother said the things she should have said years ago, even though it was late, even though late is not the same as never. I'm not interested in holding the past in front of them like a debt they have to keep repaying. I'm interested in what comes next. What's possible between people who finally, after a long time, start to see each other clearly. I'm the one who got called a tryhard at my father's retirement dinner. I'm also the one designing the building that will stand in this city long after that dinner is forgotten. I didn't build it to prove anything. I built it because the work mattered and because I was the right person to do it. Both of those things are true. They don't cancel each other out. They just both get to exist at the same time, which, I've learned, is usually how the truth works. I think about the drive home from my father's office when I was 9 years old. I sat in the back seat. Nobody introduced me. The photograph on his desk had 2 people in it, and I was standing at the door, waiting. I carried that image for 24 years without fully understanding what I was carrying, until the night in that ballroom when the host read my name out loud, and I watched my father's face go completely still. What happened that evening wasn't luck. It wasn't fate in any mystical sense. It was the straightforward result of choices compounding over time, Every morning I got up and did the work when no one was watching. That was a choice. Every time I redirected my energy away from seeking their approval and toward building something real, that was a choice. Actions accumulate. They become a record, and eventually, a record becomes undeniable even to the people who spent years choosing not to look. I used to think that what I lacked was confidence. I understand now that what I was actually developing, slowly and without realizing it, was something steadier than confidence. It was judgment, the ability to assess a problem clearly, to see what a situation actually required rather than what I wished it required, and to act on that assessment even when nobody was validating it. That kind of clarity doesn't come from being praised. It comes from being ignored long enough that you stop outsourcing your sense of direction to other people. The 6 years I spent building my practice in relative invisibility, those weren't wasted years. They were the years I learned how to think. How to ask the right questions about a space, a community, a design problem. How to sit with uncertainty long enough to find the real answer instead of the fast one. Charlotte recognized something in my work before she recognized me, and what she recognized was the evidence of that thinking. You can't fake that. You can't shortcut it. It only exists if you actually did the work in the unglamorous hours with no audience. And then there's the part I'm most reluctant to talk about, which is the part about staying decent through all of it, not performing decency. I mean the actual harder thing of not letting the years of being overlooked turn me into someone who overlooked other people in return. Of not building a wall so high that when my sister genuinely tried to reach across it, I refused to meet her. Of being honest with my father, telling him clearly that the conversation was 6 years late, without making honesty into a weapon. That took something. I'm not entirely sure where it came from. I think it came from understanding, somewhere along the way, that bitterness is expensive. It costs you the very clarity you need to keep building. The work is still the point. It was the point when nobody knew about it, and it's the point now that people do. The building that goes up in the city will stand long after the retirement dinner's forgotten, long after my sister's speech fades from memory, long after whatever reconciliation my family and I are slowly, imperfectly attempting has either held or not held. I'm not the try-hard at the back table anymore. I was never just that. I just had to be patient enough to let what I was actually building become visible and honest enough with myself to keep building it even when I wasn't sure anyone would ever see.